Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye. Welcome, Mr. Rogers. Okay, in your packet, you have the meeting minutes for April 14th. Is there a motion to approve?
I move that we approve the minutes.
Second.
Mr. Rogers? Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye. Okay, so that takes us now to PCR number 22-005, the request of Strangeway Brewing for a text change amendment to allow a microbrewery, micro distillery, micro winery, and/or a micro cidery with a capacity of not more than 15,000 barrels per year with a special use permit in the Economic Development E2 District. Ms. Burke.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, you could take the second one as well, which is
Okay.
a related special use permit.
Okay, so that would be PCR number 22-006.
Yes. This is a request on behalf of Strangeways Brewing to amend the zoning ordinance and to add the microbrewery designation to the ED2 Economic Development District. The applicant is also requesting a special use permit to operate a microbrewery at 1430 Unit 1103 High Street. It's the former Pendleton location. This property is designated as economic development in the 2021 Comprehensive Plan. This land use category is intended to encourage economic development activities that provide desirable employment and enlarge the city's tax base. The ED and ED2 districts implement this category. To ensure that a majority of the economic development land is used for tax-generating commercial, entertainment, office, and medical uses, areas used exclusively for residential use should be limited to a minority of the land use in the economic development areas in the plan. This property is zoned Economic Development District ED2 and is established to enhance the city's real property tax base and to allow for a mixture of tax-generating commercial, entertainment, and office uses in a mixed-use setting with an emphasis on landscaping and high-quality design standards, and on property which is designated in the comprehensive plan as economic development land use. Higher intensity uses such as manufacture or assembly, warehouses, and distribution centers may be allowed with the issuance of a special use permit. The Architectural Review Board reviewed proposed patio furnishings for at their April 12th meeting, and the board discussed lighting of the patio space. The applicant intends to occupy the structure shown here in the former Pendleton store location, as well as having patio seating outside on the corner of Richmond Road and High Street. The Site Plan Review Committee met on March 16th and were in support of this proposal. The use of microbrewery, microdistillery, microwinery, and/or microcidery in the Economic Development ED2 District is compatible with the stated intent of the district. The use of the location at 1403 Unit 1103 High Street as a microbrewery is supported by other dining and entertainment establishments in the High Street development. The applicant is proposing to have an outdoor dining area in addition to their indoor space. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on April 20th. Other than the applicant, no one spoke at the public hearing. The Planning Commission voted to recommend approval by a vote of 7-0. Staff recommends approval of PCR 22-005, request of Strangeways Brewing for a text change amendment to allow microbrewery, microdistillery, microwinery, and/or microcidery with a capacity of not more than 15,000 barrels per year, with a special use permit in the Economic Development ED2 District. And staff recommends approval of PCR 22-006, a request of Strangeways Brewing for a special use permit to operate a restaurant and microbrewery at 1430 1103 High Street. Staff is available if the council has any questions, and the applicant is present as well.
Wonderful. Just out of curiosity, I guess in terms of the brewing operations, it would be much like we see at Precarious Spear or something like that.
Correct.
Any questions for
Yeah.
Burke?
Thank you, Ms. Burke. Two quick questions. Could you talk about the significance of the 15,000 barrels and what that
Certainly.
means for this?
15,000 barrels is generally an industry standard. It's kind of the cutoff point from going from a microbrewery in this case to a major distributor. That number is kind of seen universally, not just in Virginia, but across the country. It doesn't indicate that the applicant will be producing that much. It's just a limitation that's placed on the property. Essentially, the thought is once they get beyond that, they become more of an industrial user and they have a larger distribution area, so they would need, a different kind of land use in that case.
Thank you. And the second question, in watching the planning commission, and the special use permit says to operate a restaurant and microbrewery. So from watching the planning commission meeting, the restaurant is composed of eating foods, not a full-fledged.
Correct, yes. And the applicant encourages, if you watch the meeting, the applicant also encourages patrons to bring in outside food from the area, which is why it's an ideal location at High Street.
Thank you.
The Vice Mayor covered my two questions, but when the applicant comes up, if maybe talk about schedule.
Okay.
And I have no questions other than what's already been posed.
Thank you.
Mr. Rogers?
Thank you for that presentation. I just have one quick question. It is a larger parcel, which is exciting to see with our strong residential community near the area. Do you know how long that corner as a unit has been vacant?
The Pendleton tenant vacated sometime during 2020, but I don't know their exact date.
Okay, around 2 years though. Okay, well that's good to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Burke.
Thank you.
So with that, I'll open up the public hearing. If anybody would like to come forward, I'd certainly welcome the applicant to come. Comments? Welcome, sir.
How are y'all?
Doing very well, thank you. How are you?
Doing great. Yeah, we're just excited about the location. I've got a lot of ties to Williamsburg and excited to come to town. We think it's ideal for this shopping center, which has a lot of restaurants in it currently, kind of pair up with them and work together. We have, it's a lot of outdoor area coupled with the indoor area. We think it'll allow people to bring food from the local restaurants over to enjoy a beer at our space, kind of revitalize this shopping center. I'm an old clothing retailer, so I was a shopper of Pendleton and liked what they did, but obviously clothing retailers have gotten harder to stick around in certain areas, and I think that this particular center really showcases a lot of things around the town that people can come and visit and have fun. And I think Revolution Bar and Grill, which is a unique space where you can go in and play indoor golf, these types of uses I think are interesting. So I think we kind of really couple with this shopping center. In fact, the shopping center reached out to us. They kind of sought us out they thought we'd be kind of a perfect tenant for the space. So it kind of came together rather quickly. We actually started, we got contacted from the landlord exactly almost June 18th of 2021, so almost a year ago. And so we've been moving very quickly, and we appreciate y'all's support. Y'all have been very quick at helping us to get through the different various stages that we need to get through. So
Good. If you don't mind, I think Councilman Maslin may have a question.
Oh, yeah, so what's the schedule like in terms of projected opening date?
we'd like to open mid-June. Yeah, we have to drop in a walk-in cooler. We have to build a bar. We have to build a men's restroom, and it's tables, chairs, decoration after that. So we've got a very good contractor that we've utilized before that's very quick, and he's always dropped our projects before schedule. So we have indoor tables on order currently. That might be our longest lead time. They're supposed to ship the week of June the 10th, I think June 10th, 11th. So
Well, that's great, because the chief will tell you that we've targeted Tuesday, October 4th for their National Night Out, which will be at High Street. So we're hoping,
great.
600 people will be there, so that'll be great. Great that you guys will be open.
awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions?
So you operate other facilities?
Yes, this would be our fourth location. So we have 2 in Richmond and 1 in my hometown of Fredericksburg. And I used to live in Williamsburg when I was younger when I got out of college. So kind of exciting to bring it full circle.
Awesome.
So one question on top of that, are all of your other locations the same model as far as size of capacity and what you do for food and
Right.
things like?
They're all very different. The original location on Dabney Road is our largest system. It's 20 barrels, and it's a big producing system which can make, we're talking 15,000 barrels a year. It doesn't produce that amount of barrelage, even though it's a big system. It produces thousands of barrels a year. 15,000 is achievable with more tanks, and that's in that location, though. The second facility in Fredericksburg is actually, we had a clothing store down in Tidewater called the Scotsman, also garment zone, and so that's a family business. And so our office warehouse in Fredericksburg, we converted into a brewery, so my parents are now my landlords there. And that's a 10-barrel system and 10,000 square feet, which is, this particular location in Williamsburg is 4,000 square feet, which mirrors what we have in our Scott's Addition location, also 4,000 square feet. And so the most similar would be, which we haven't, is the location in Scott's Addition, would be most similar to this location here. And the food is fairly standardized amongst the 4 locations. It's mostly snack foods, heat and warm, snacky type foods, big Bavarian pretzels that are soft, nachos, cheese and chili, chips and salsa, small pre-made pizzas that we heat up, things of that nature. We're not a restaurant at all, really. Yeah.
Do you have entertainment at your other locations?
We do. In Scott's Addition, it's usually inside and outside, and like a one or two person act, because it's kind of this, kind of mirrors the size of the space. Whereas in like Fredericksburg, which is a 10,000 square foot space, we're on 3 acres all our own. We have an outdoor stage and an indoor stage. It's a little bit more of a music venue at times, but this Williamsburg location, again, being like Scott's Addition, would be for more small acts and likely inside. I mean, we might do something outside every once in a while, but it's right there on the street, so you do have street traffic, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
When do you think you'll be starting production at this location?
Immediately. Well, yeah, upon opening, we'll be working on production.
Okay,
So.
yeah. You talked about the refrigerator. I didn't know if you're going to bring in all the other equipment that makes that happen.
Yeah, so the walk-in cooler is quite sizable, 33 feet by 10 feet by 10 feet. So it's a big walk-in, and then we'll have barrel aging space as well. And we have a back room for that, and some on the floor as well.
Thank you. Excellent. Well, I appreciate you coming forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to come forward and speak to this? I'm sorry. Oh, Caleb. I'm sorry, Caleb, do you have any questions?
No, that's fine. I would have said so if I did. My only comment would be we've seen some great businesses open in High Street with Revolution Golf and Grill, with Tipsy Bean. So I'm excited to welcome Strange Ways Brewing to activate that corner.
Seeing no one else come forward, I'll close the public hearing and then come back to council for comments. Mr. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I agree with all the comments. I think it'll add not only to the landscape of Richmond Road, but to High Street in general. And the fact that folks will be able to bring food from other locations and come there and enjoy a beverage if they so choose, I think it's a benefit to the city and to that area.
I agree.
Yeah, I think it fulfills the intent of the district, and High Street has a mix of entertainment and food options, so this will just add to it. You can go work out at Orange Theory and go get a beer afterwards. And I do think that it's a great location for having outdoor dining, and as the Vice Mayor said, can help activate Richmond Road and give it a little different feel.
I agree with all that's been said. I've noticed a bit of a churn in the more chain restaurants that we've had in that particular building area of High Street. So it'll be nice to have a Virginia-owned brewery that is expanding and, to the point that's been made, activating a good area of Richmond Road.
Well, I certainly echo all the sentiments that my colleagues have said. Seeing that type of vitality on the corner and activity, bringing, people that may not otherwise be in that shopping center to the shopping center will help support the other businesses. And so I think this is a complementary use for this portion of the property. So look forward to seeing you all come forward. Is there a motion on both of these items?
So I move that City Council approve PCR 22-005, a request of Strange Ways Brewing for a text change amendment to allow microbrewery, microdistillery, microwinery, and/or microcidery with a capacity of not more than 15,000 barrels per year with a special use permit in the Economic Development ED2 and PCR 22-06, a request of Strange Ways Brewing for a special use permit to operate a restaurant and microbrewery at 1430 through 1103 High Street.
Second.
Thank you, Ms.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Thank you. Good luck. Congratulations. All right, so that takes us now to PCR 22-010, a zoning text change to restate and amend text regarding administration and approvals of special use permits to allow an extension of not more than 180 days. Ms. Burke.
This one will be a little less complicated. On February 10th, 2022, City Council directed staff to draft an ordinance for consideration by Planning Commission and City Council to amend the zoning ordinance to allow for extensions of previously approved special use permits. This amendment request is due to the result, is a result of 3 special use permits that expired and had to file new applications to be renewed. The 3 projects all experienced delays due to staff concerns during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Specifically, the following sections of the city zoning ordinance require updating per the attached ordinance. Section 21-26 of the Williamsburg Code to allow the zoning administrator to grant extensions of not more than 180 days for the expiration of outstanding special use permits under certain hardship circumstances. For the purposes of this ordinance, those circumstances beyond the permittee's control shall include wars, floods, unusual delays in transportation, adverse weather conditions not reasonably anticipated, epidemics declared as national public health emergencies by the federal government, a state health emergency declared by the governor of Virginia, or a local health emergency declared by Williamsburg City Council, and other unforeseen acts of God sufficient in magnitude that vitally affect the permittee's ability to timely carry out terms of the special use permit, and to amend Section 21-46 of the Williamsburg Code to reword and clarify the approval period. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on April 20th, 2022, and there were no speakers at the public hearing. Planning Commission voted to recommend approval by a vote of 7-0. Staff recommends approval of PCR 22-010, a text change to restate and amend text regarding administration and approvals of special use permits to allow extensions of not more than 180 days. Staff is available if you have any questions.
Thank you. And as you mentioned, this was a result of some of the previous votes that we've had. And so just put it simply, if an applicant has gotten delayed for any of the various reasons that you stated, this would give them an opportunity to have a staff look it over. Now, if they made a change to that request, then that's a different.
Correct.
Right, and it would have to come back and go through the process of staff review, planning commission, and then back to city council.
Yes, this is simply to renew a previously approved permit, not to amend that permit.
Questions?
No questions, thank you.
A couple questions. So I think attending the planning commission meeting, I think their clarification was specifying that the applicant would come to your department within 30 days prior to the expiration.
Yes.
That was the clarification, right, which was good. The other sections, 21-46, a couple of questions there. On A, allowing city council to make appropriate changes to or impose appropriate conditions upon the proposed special use permit. Is that a change, or did we have that before? So we've got, so that means when we have a special use applicant, for example, recently there was discussion about maybe a sound fence. We could have imposed.
Yes.
If we wanted to approve that.
Yes.
So that's a good.
And that's been in the code all this time.
Okay.
The only thing that changed is there were some Code of Virginia required extensions that were listed inside the city code, and we removed those because they had either expired or they will shortly soon expire. And so it was just to clean the code up.
And then in that paragraph B, if an applicant for a special use permit presents a specific construction schedule for the project as part of the application, the city council may specify an expiration date for the submittal of the final site plans or plans based on submitted time schedule.
Correct.
So do you see that much in terms of?
Not typically. That language has been in the ordinance. That isn't new, but at least in my experience in the last 5 years, we haven't had that kind of instance. Occasionally, city council, special use permits are typically good for a year. A good example of a recently approved one was the Matthew Whaley Learning Cottages, in which city council and the motion specifically states that that approval is good for 5 years.
And then after the site plan approval, the site plan approval gives them 5-year window.
Yes.
And then the building permit then takes over in terms of the starting point. And what does the building permit give in terms of time?
So once the building permit's issued, I believe it's good for 6 months, it may be a year. They can file to renew their building permit if they need to, but they have to stay within that. If they let their building permit expire, then the clock still ticks on their site plan, essentially. So they can't pull their building permit and then wait.
But the building, once they get the building permit and they start part of the construction, that
yes.
satisfied that, right?
Yes.
Is there any limit at that point in terms of completing?
There is a timeline in which they have to receive inspections. They can't, dig the footings and then leave their permit open at that point. They have to receive inspections on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have no questions. I think it's fairly straightforward.
Councilman Rogers?
And neither do I, in the case where we have a major event that forces one of our developers to push back in the future, this would only help them avoid needing to come back in front of council again for the same work. So hopefully allow their timeline to move forward. No questions.
If there's no other questions, we'll open the public hearing, and if anybody would like to come forward and speak to this matter, please come forward. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing, come back to council for further discussion or a motion.
This is exactly what we requested, so.
So I move that City Council approve PCR 22-010, a zoning text change to restate and amend text regarding administration and approvals of special use permits to allow extensions of not more than 180 days.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Thank you. So that now takes us to item D, consideration of resolution number 22-09, authorizing a budget amendment to the capital improvement plan, funds to establish a budget stabilization reserve. Ms. Dameron.
Good afternoon. With our ARPA funds qualifying for revenue loss, and council approved Resolution 2207 in April, which approved the revenue loss project and the use of ARPA funds in the general fund to provide government services. We now have funds available that can be used to help fund capital improvement projects without some of the time limitations that the ARPA funds would have had. So staff is requesting the approval of a budget stabilization reserve in the capital improvement projects fund in the amount of $4,150,000. That would be used not only in FY23 to help balance that fund, but also in future years.
And so in approving this, we're not putting a green light on the items in the CIP. This just sets aside the funds in this reserve.
That is correct. And the items in the CIP, many of them would have to come back because of the amount for council's consideration and approval, but it does provide that reserve there should we need it to help stabilize that fund.
Questions?
Yeah, and the mayor makes a great point, because I've had this question from several citizens about the CIP. Just because it's approved as part of the budget, those projects have a dollar figure attached that requires them to come back for city council, which would also allow the public the opportunity to provide input on those projects as well.
That is,
Not all of them, but many of them do, yes.
That's all I have. Thanks.
Just comments on ARPA funds in general. So I think one of the things that we might want to explain to our residents is living in the Commonwealth of Virginia is really an advantage to us, number one, because as most of you know, that we're the only state where you're not living in a county or a city.
Correct. We have
And
independent cities.
So the other states, you know, the ARPA funds really filter down to cities through counties.
That is
And so
correct.
we really, all the cities in Virginia really were at an advantage of being able to get the funds directly allocated to us. And then the second thing that you've talked about is the ability to, as the rules were finalized, being able to justify more of the fund application as loss of revenue, giving us the flexibility to use that for projects, but not be having our hands tied in terms of schedules. So it gives us that flexibility.
It does, and it has a real advantage, and we got some funds directly, and then we got an allocation from the state too. So in a little bit of, I don't want to say double dipping, but it definitely worked to our advantage.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the clarification, and I think to sort of tie on to Mr. Maslin's comments, I think we also got some, not just because we're an independent city, but because we're a non-entitled city, which also factored into the amount, and through the help of VML, I believe.
Yes, that is correct, and that was part of the two tranche. We got one directly from the federal government, and then the other through the state, because we're a non-entitlement unit.
Thank you. Nothing else.
Mr. Rogers, any questions before the public hearing?
No, I have no questions about the stabilization fund. Thank you, Director Dameron.
Thank you. With no other questions, I'll open the public hearing if anybody would like to come forward. Seeing no one rushing forward, I'll close the public hearing and come back to council for further discussion or a motion.
Other
Comments?
questions? So I move that City Council adopt Resolution 22-09, establishing a budget stabilization reserve in the CIP fund to assist in funding current and future CIP projects.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Takes us now to item E, proposed resolution 21-10 appropriates the use of coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds, SLRFA, allocated to the city as part of the state's American Rescue Plan Act. Ms. Dameron again.
I know some of these are a mouthful, aren't they? The Commonwealth of Virginia allocated a portion of their coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds to support domestic marketing organizations. A portion of those funds was allocated to Virginia cities and counties. The city of Williamsburg was awarded $670,000. The Virginia Tourism Corporation must approve the plan for using the funds. One of their requirements is we're encouraged to work regionally and to also have the plan approved by the area's designated marketing organization, which for our area is Visit Williamsburg. And to this end, James City County, York County, and Williamsburg have all agreed to allocate a portion of their allocation to Visit Williamsburg to launch a marketing campaign geared toward drawing Boston, Massachusetts residents to Williamsburg area. The city has allocated $402,000 to the project for Visit Williamsburg. And then the city also allocated, or is requesting to allocate, the remaining $268,000 to a signature designation event. This could be one event or a series of events, and they're designed to, again, draw visitors to Williamsburg. We expect to issue an RFP. We would hope to award that in July, and then have the event in spring of FY23.
And so, as you said, part of this, receiving these funds requires an application from Destination Marketing Organization to the VTC, which had to be approved.
And it has been approved.
Yep, good. And I think some of those efforts are already underway, despite the funds not coming in yet, so. Any questions, Mr. Vice Mayor?
No, I think it's appropriate use of the funds, and as Vicki Semino was a guest speaker at the EDA Business Roundtable today, so they're doing a lot of great things, and obviously this funding will help them to continue to drive tourism for the area.
I agree.
Same for me, no questions.
Mr. Rogers?
I just had one from my vantage point. While it looks like I might be able to tell as the big man on the screen, I can't actually see who is in the audience. Are any representatives from Visit Williamsburg available?
Not at the, they're not here.
That's okay. I'll follow up with Vicky after about their plan for Boston, but no particular questions about this.
Well, and just to reply to that, as Vice Mayor Dent mentioned, she addressed some of that today in her roundtable, and that will be available for the general public. A recording was made, so all of that information will be available for everyone to follow along.
No other questions? I'll open the public hearing. If anybody would like to come forward. Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and come back to council for further discussion or motion.
So I recommend that City Council approve the resolution to accept and appropriate $670,000 of the tourism ARPA funds to the city's ARPA fund to be used for the tourism plan approved by the Virginia Tourism Corporation. The funds will be allocated to Visit Williamsburg for a media campaign and for the city to fund a signature destination event.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay. Takes us to report, and I see Ms. Dammers on the ready for our monthly financial statement stuff.
Okay, I'm going to start once again with the COVID-19 recovery report. And again, I'm going to direct our attention first to columns E, F, and G. E is where we projected, based on our adopted budget for the year, that we would be at the end of April. And then, of course, F is our actual results for April, and G is the variance. And you will note that I only have one red number up there this time, and that's in the real estate tax. So when you do these projections, I'm using about 3 years of prior history or trend data on how we expect that revenue to come in. And unfortunately, we don't always do that systematically every year in the same manner. So there are variations from year to year, and I think that's exactly what's happening with the real estate tax. You will note, if you look in column I, which is where I project ending the year, I'm still anticipating that we're going to meet that budget, or at least be very close to it. The remaining revenues are all positive, and in part because we did have a conservative budget in 22, not being sure how things would pan out with COVID. But certainly several of our revenues, particularly business, professional, and occupational license, lodging, meals tax, and sales tax are really trending a good bit ahead of our budget projections. And if you look over to where I anticipate ending the year, I think we only have a small negative variance in personal property tax. I didn't highlight that in red because frankly it's small enough that we could possibly make that up as we move forward in the year. But I am anticipating that we will exceed our budget by $2.7 million. Now, some of these revenues aren't in the general fund, so I believe that the general fund revenues anticipate exceeding by about $2.2 million. I will remind you that we anticipated drawing about $2.5 million from the reserve, so that still leaves about $300,000. I'm still hopeful maybe we'll break even. We'll keep monitoring that as we move forward. So I've also highlighted some revenues over on the left-hand side, and those are ones that I'm just comparing to fiscal 19. I think that's a good comparison because it was the last year before COVID. Our B-poll tax is not quite matching where we were in April for fiscal 19, but it's not a big variance there. It's a minor variance with that. Also with our sales tax, and you'll note on sales tax, again, I have a little bit lighter highlight. That's because if we hadn't had to redirect $300,000 this year in terms of activity, we would have exceeded where we were in 19. And then Our tourism is not trailing too far behind currently. Our tourism sales tax, probably the largest variance I have comparing to 19 is in our lodging tax, and it is about 115,000 below where we were in FY19. Now, in our general fund, our expenditures are still in line with budget. And these revenues address about the significant revenues in all our funds with the exception of utility funds. I want to spend a few minutes on that. Our revenues there continue to come in strong. I anticipate that both our water and sewer revenues are going to exceed budget. We continue to see our consumption use up, certainly compared to last year. Our water revenue is in line with where we were in FY19, and our sewer is up about 2% compared to 2019. Our expenditures operationally are in line with budget. We did budget to draw about $1,300,000 from net position. I don't see that improving, but only because earlier we had the opportunity to buy some land to protect our watershed. And so I think we'll be consistent with what we had budgeted in terms of draw. But again, we'll continue to monitor that. I'll also note that we have included the Arpa report, the last 2 pages, 12 and 13. It does report all of our things that we considered with ARPA funding. You will note that only 2 projects, though, have spending. That's because they're the 2 that you've already approved. That would be the Williamsburg redevelopment and the Housing Authority security projects, as well as the cyber security projects. That concludes my formal comments. I'll be happy to answer questions if you have any.
So, just a question, comment. When I look at on page 9, the 1% sales tax, and I see growth of almost 30%, I'm always fearful that this allocation of funds belong to the county. I mean, do you have any indication that that's a true number?
For the current sales tax, I'm not aware of any other additional funds that we received that we should not have. But sometimes they don't show up till later.
Right, well, yeah, my fear is that at some point they're gonna come, oops, that's too much money and we're gonna take it back from you.
Well, and then I get concerned because I'm always talking about how we compare to 19, but probably some of the funds that we're now giving back could have come from 19, so.
Do you anticipate maybe by next month we will retire the COVID-19 dashboard report?
I think so. I think so, yes.
Any question, Mr. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Ms. Dameron. I did have a question on the real estate tax, but thank you for
Right.
covering that in your presentation. And it's good to see that we're not too far behind those 19 numbers, and more importantly, that the draw on the reserve is going to be much less than we anticipated when we started this. And then my question was comment was going to be that hopefully in the near future, we won't be looking at a COVID-19 recovery report.
Yeah, looking at the report, and I think maybe we could rename it because this is, if we look at columns B and F, these are very helpful in terms of us looking at trending. And looking specifically at lodging tax and meal tax, so if we combine the 2 for pre-COVID, that FY19 year-to-date, April, that's about 7.5 million versus what we've got now, 8 million. So we're actually up about 6.5% versus pre-COVID, which is great because we know at the beginning of this year, between staff shortages, hotels being closed, that there were a lot of things that were inhibiting those taxes. So I think that's really good projection. The other thing, if we look at the $2 lodging tax, although that looks like that's down about 15%, which is an indication of occupancy being down.
Right.
So the revenues are really going up, especially for the hotels, but the occupancy isn't there. And as we learned in our roundtable, EDA roundtable, we've just seen the recovery trending of the leisure travel, with no indication of recovery for business and international travel. So there's a lot of ability for that to improve. And then if we look at column I, if we look at column I for lodging tax, 3.38 million is what you're projected at the end of the year, and meals tax, 7.8 million projected at the end of this year. If we could just remember that and we'll talk about the budget.
Sure.
And what those numbers look like there. Thanks.
Thank you for the report and the explanation. Just a couple questions. So we talked about the sort of repayment of sales tax to other municipalities for that wrong allocation. Have we paid all of that back now?
We have, that we're aware of now, we
Okay.
have. They, that was taken in, I believe, December, January, and February.
Okay. And the real estate tax, just as a reminder, real estate taxes for the second half of FY22 are due
June
June
1st. June 1st.
June the 1st. So we still have, all of us, including me, have a couple weeks yet to make that payment and help make up that deficit. And I think it's important to just be constantly mindful of what you were talking about with the surplus going against the projected draw on the reserve. Because I think a lot of us look at that and think, whoopee, but really it's not in our hands, so to speak.
Correct.
Could you just sort of refresh or say again what you had commented before about how that money
I think-
balances against what would be the reserve?
I think one way to say it is that if you look at this is the anticipated surplus or deficit of the list of revenues on that sheet. What this means, correct me if I'm wrong, Barbara, is that we would, if this stands to be true, we finish this fiscal year with a surplus in the general fund of slightly more than $300,000.
Well, it's about 2.5 that we had anticipated drawing and about 2.2 ahead.
Right.
So it'd be, we could, but based on that, anticipate drawing about 300,000. However, I'm hopeful that between that and maybe expenditures, I don't think we're going to see the gap that we've seen in the past with expenditures because of inflation. If you'll recall, when we did the 22 budget, the only thing that we increased were things that had contracts with escalators.
Right.
We had held everything else level, and so then we've incurred inflation. So I'm hopeful that
So-
we may break even. I'm certainly thankful that it won't be
So
as
when-
large a draw.
When Ms. Dameron says break even, what she means is we won't have to draw from the reserve. We'll have a balanced budget without the need to draw from the reserve.
Right.
And what's important about that is the proposed budget, which is also on the agenda, is predicated on that being the condition when we finish this fiscal year.
Thank you for that reminder.
Mr. Rogers?
Thank you.
Questions?
On top of everything that's been asked, I do not have anything to add, only that it's good to hear that now after 2 years, we may retire the COVID-19 report with the trend line starting last month of mostly revenues that are in the black or, to your point, on the real estate tax, nearly there. Thank you, Director Dameron.
And so just following up on Councilman Maslin's point about occupancy tax, and certainly it is correct. You know, the number of rooms being rented is less. What's driving the growth in revenue, as he points out, is higher ADR, average daily rate. And that's wholly focused on leisure travel. Mom and dad and kids, you're traveling to Williamsburg. As you know, I'm the treasurer of the Tourism Council, and we just completed, well, it hadn't been approved, but completed the budget going into next year. And we grappled with what does the future look like? And will leisure travel hold up given gas prices, inflation, uncertainty, consumer confidence? And I think we ended up, I can't recall the exact percentage, of 2 to 4% increase in growth. But I think significant in the conversation was that we had hoped that business and group travel would come back in 2023. Industry now says it's likely to be 2024. So with that pushback and the uncertainty of leisure travel next year, it's it's hard to say how we're going to turn out. I anticipate we'll see some growth, but it won't be at the level that we've seen growth here this year.
I'm very concerned about the impact on, if the inflation continues, the impact on disposable income and how that might impact people eating out or traveling.
Consumer confidence
It's huge.
it's already starting to wane. So.
And one thing with the numbers on lodging, I would think that, I don't believe any new properties have been added in the area, and I would imagine there are less hotel rooms now than there were a few years ago.
There are a few, yes. Any other questions for Ms. Dameron? Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate you coming forward. City Manager's report, Mr. Trivett, anything?
No, sir.
City Attorney?
No, sir.
Takes us now to unfinished business. First is item A, consideration and award of bid for a 2022 street resurfacing. Mr. Small. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Today, we're here to look at, we have a new controller. 2022 street resurfacing. This is our annual schedule where we try to pick the worst streets that we have to and go ahead and do a resurfacing of the asphalt. This year, we have 3.27 lane miles of local streets, as well as the parking lot at Quarter Path Rec Center. The streets on the schedule are all in the Highland Park community, with the exception of one block on Harrison Avenue, west of Richmond Road. We tried to get to this street before, but were delayed because of the activity going on in and around the House of Mercy during the pandemic. So we decided to put that off until now. And the rest of the streets are in the Highland Park community, and it includes basically everything in the community northwest of Route 132. So there's a number of streets in there, so it's a large area. We received 2 bids on this project at the time, and from Lehigh Paving Corp. as well as Branscombe Inc. Branscombe Inc. Gave us the low bid at $595,152.61. And so the work will proceed throughout the end of the month and into June, be done, we hope, by June 30th. All funds are in the FY22 CIP, and that's our recommendation. Questions?
No big grant that you were able to
Not on
push a
this
rock over and find?
Not on this one.
Okay, good. Well, I certainly support it. I think part of what we have in the city is, great streets, and we keep them in good repair, no major infrastructure decay, and this is part of making sure that the streets are well kept.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's important to keep the roads in pristine condition, and we don't want to fall behind on these paving schedules, so.
2 questions. So I know that fiscal year ends the end of June, and that's when the project's aspiring to end. But knowing the way the weather's been going lately, is there any problem if you don't meet that deadline?
It doesn't affect us as much on the CIP projects because we can go across the fiscal year, because once those funds are allocated, they're pretty much set aside in that fund for that project. And so it's not really a problem, but Ms. Dameron really does like it when I try to close everything out by the end of the fiscal year.
So the second question, this is based on some concern we had with neighbors for a recent sidewalk project where their street became the staging area, but for the contractors. In terms of your pre-planning with the contractors, do you work out staging areas for them for their equipment?
We try to in a lot of areas. Like, for instance, we do work with the contractors. It's actually up to them to acquire one, but we also try to work with them and help them find a staging area. The one instance where you were talking about, he was using the public street. He just, it would have been better if he'd have notified some of the neighbors in front of him. And in this case, where we're going to be working inside Highland Park, we've already started working with our communications office on making sure they're well aware a week ahead of time.
Thank you.
I have no questions, just to clarify that this is part of a regular maintenance program, and so that, we can keep up with them throughout the city, and also that the funds have been allocated, so it's not a request for additional funding.
Oh, ma'am.
Thanks for the presentation, Mr. Smalls. Fully plan to support it, but two questions for maybe the residents on in Highland Park and then on Harrison Avenue. So first to the latter, it was describing Harrison Avenue as the area west of Richmond Road. I more
Yes.
think of Harrison north of Richmond Road. So is there only a portion of Harrison Ave?
Right, the portion of we had paved a few years ago, portion east of Richmond Road from between Richmond Road and Lafayette Street. So that was already resurfaced a couple years ago, but it was kind of during the height of the pandemic. And there was basically daily activity going on at the House of Mercy food pantry. And so what we decided to do is we're going to just not pave that section because we didn't want to interfere with their operations because we felt they were so critical to the community. So we put off that side, but we're kind of now to the point where their operations have really slowed down, and we think we can get in there quickly to get that road resurfaced.
Okay, great. All right.
And it's only about a block long.
Right. It's pretty short. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. On Highland Park, it's laid out in a grid system such that if one street is being paved, you can probably still get in and out unless it's on that North Henry drag. So what's the communication plan for that neighborhood or the civic association that they have, just to let them know, hey, we have
Right.
some.
We're going to be talking with them probably to do door hangers at least a week ahead of time before we actually commence operations and try to keep it ahead of how we actually do the milling and paving. Our intent is to only block driveways for, as long as the paver's going in front while we get it compacted. So, and that's what we always try to do. We work with homeowners to make sure that check with them. Do you have a doctor's appointment? Then maybe we'll move your car out ahead of time and help you get through the work zone. So we're very cognizant of working with neighbors and making sure that, okay, your cars are not parked on the street the day that we're actually doing the paving.
I'm sure they'll appreciate that one-on-one specialization should they need it. So thank you again for the presentation. That's all.
No other questions?
So I move that City Council award the bid and authorize the city manager to execute a contract for the 2022 street resurfacing to Bransom, Inc. for $595,152.61.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Thank you. Takes us to item B, consideration and adoption of resolution number 22-11, approving the assessment ratio for personal property taxation on certain motor vehicles for the calendar year of 2022. Cameron. Need to put you on a chair with wheels.
Well, I think we're aware of the economic conditions surrounding motor vehicles and the shortage of materials driving up demand, which in turn has driven up the value of vehicles. Earlier, our Commissioner of Revenue, Laura Overy, approached council as well as city manager and suggested that we might consider the ratio that lowering the ratio that we use for assessments from 100% to 80%. This has been included in what you'll consider next in the FY23 proposed budget, the adjustment for that. However, we needed a separate resolution authorizing lowering that percentage to 80%, which would be a 20% reduction. Staff recommends that City Council approve 22-11, and because of the circumstances, lower that percentage to 80% for calendar year 22, which will impact our FY23 fiscal year budget.
Yeah, I was, thank you for that. I was certainly pleased that the recommendation came forward from the Commissioner of Revenue. I think we all have recognized the value of the used cars going up, and so to be able to offer some relief to the taxpayers has been a goal of council's, through the budget discussion. So thank you for bringing this forward, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Yeah, no questions. I agree that this is, council's work to, based on the recommendation from the Commissioner of Revenue, but it gives us another avenue to help our citizens and lessen the impact of the taxes and specifically with these personal property on vehicles, as many of us have observed the prices that are out there. So, again, it just gives us another opportunity to provide some relief to our citizens.
Yeah, I agree. I want to recognize the initiative taken by the Commissioner of Revenue and also her leadership throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia with her counterparts in working through these types of proposals. Thank you.
I have no questions or nothing to add to what's already been said. Thank you.
I have no questions either. Excited to support.
So I move that City Council approve Resolution 22-11, authorizing an assessment of 80% be applied to the fair market value of vehicles described in the Virginia Code for calendar year 2022.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Takes us now to item C, consideration and adoption of resolution number 22-12, approving the FY 2023 budget for the fiscal year commencing July 1st, 2023. Ms. Dameron, Mr. Trivett. Getting your steps in.
No. Some exercise. Resolution 22-12 requests approval of the FY '23 budget. We began discussing the budget publicly with the February retreat, followed by the city manager's proposed budget presentation on April 11th, and then the public hearing for the FY '23 budget, tax levy, and utility rate was held on April 14th. And then this past Monday, presentation reviewed the FY '23 budget and included additional slides to address changes in the general fund from the proposed budget. The FY '23 budget includes a 2-cent reduction in the real property tax rate, and that would be from the current 64 cents per hundred to 62 cents per hundred, and the personal property tax based on a 20% reduction in the fair market value of motor vehicles. The budget also includes $9.2 million from the second tranche of funding that the city will receive from the American Rescue Plan Act, which has been included in the general fund to provide government services. I want to note that the budget resolution includes an authorization for the EMS recovery rates to be set at 150% of the Medicare Part B ambulance fee schedule. This is a new request this year, and it allows the city to recover the maximum charges allowed by Medicare and any supplemental insurance. Typically, Medicare resets the allowable rates annually, unfortunately not at the same timing for our budget. So again, it just allows us to make that adjustment more timely. Included in the agenda packet is an exhibit and several schedules. Exhibit 1 details all the changes in each of the funds from the proposed FY '23 budget to the budget that we have today. The general fund changes are consistent with the changes that were presented to you on Monday. Schedule A is a summary of the budget for each operating fund. Schedule B is the local tax levies, and I will note that this includes the personal property tax relief, which will be 29% for FY '23. And then Schedule C summarizes the general fund government capital improvement program and the utility fund capital improvement budgets. This concludes my overview of the FY '23 budget and the supporting exhibit and schedules. I'd be happy to address any questions that you have regarding the budget resolution or the exhibit or the schedules.
So I don't have any questions, just some general comments. I think the budget has done, that you all presented and worked with council on, really helps us continue moving forward, to meeting the goals of the city, the expectations of the taxpayers, being able to deliver high levels of service, employee retention, good, good equipment for people to use to make sure jobs get done. And we're able to do that with some reduction in the tax percentage on real estate and personal property for personal owned vehicles. I recognize that assessments have gone up in a greater amount than the reduction in tax that doesn't equal out. But that said, we're all faced with some challenges. Inflation's higher, the expenses at the city are greater. So to be able to offer some relief while meeting the needs of the city, I think is important. And I think all of council would agree that, our first priority is our residents and taxpayers to make sure that we continue to delivering those services and providing what the expectation is of the residents. So I support the budget and thank you for all your hard work, both you and all your staff.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and just want to say, first of all, I know that the city manager mentioned in previous budget presentations that typically he prepares a budget and presents it to city council, and fortunately, and for city council and for the community as well, that we had the opportunity this year to work together to come up with some relief for our citizens, which included the personal property and now a real estate tax reduction. All of that keeping in mind that, as the mayor indicated, delivering a high level of service, but also making sure that we take care of our employees with the compensation, not only for public safety, but we're with some adjustments in revenues recently from the Commissioner of Revenue's office, we're able to have some salary compensation adjustments, provide that for the remainder of the employees. And during this budget process, as I mentioned earlier, when we were talking about CIP, I've had people in the community mention to me about some of the CIP projects that maybe they didn't necessarily support, or maybe thought that the price tag was too high. And just as a reminder that, as we talked about earlier, many of those projects still have to come back to city council. And if we're in a position at the time that we can't fund those projects, then we'll make that decision at the time. But I think the other thing this budget does is it sets us up for some financial stability in the next 4 or 5 years that maybe we were really concerned about during COVID. So I appreciate the opportunity working with you and the city manager to develop this budget. I think it's a good budget. It's obviously not everybody's going to agree that it's a perfect budget. Maybe they're looking for more tax relief, but I think we provided some tax relief that's substantial, but also keeps us financially stable. And as the city manager pointed out on Monday, and I think Councilwoman Ramsey, is that inflation's not only affecting us individually, it's affecting the city as well in different areas, gas prices, materials. Excuse me, we've already seen those cost changes in the fire station project. So we have to take that into account as we move forward as well. So I'm in support of the budget. Thank you.
Mr. Maslin?
Thanks. Yeah, all good comments. And thanks, Barbara, for all the work that you did and your team, and as well as the department heads supporting that. It's very important that we stay competitive with our compensation levels for both the recruiting and retention of our employees. As talked about on Monday, this is really unprecedented times in terms of inflation, and we know that the average real estate assessment may be going up 12% within the city. In my neighborhood, it's more like 18%. So having a 3% reduction in real estate taxes will help some. A couple other things that we've seen, thanks to our real estate assessor and his sort of accelerated timeline, has really helped several things. It gets all of our residents the information they need to know when we're discussing the budget as to how it impacts them. Number two, every year he's able to more fine-tune the accuracy of those assessments, and as far as I can tell, there have not been any appeals. So no appeals this year. So I know that there have been maybe 6 or 7 discussions with the assessor in terms of answering questions, but I think that's incredible to have no appeals. It really shows the accuracy that we've seen in those assessments. The other good thing by accelerating this, it really capped the inflation assessment escalation at December. So we know that a lot of our values are continuing to go up, but the assessment to our residents really was capped at the end of this year. And when they would actually be paying these bills will actually be this coming December. So we're talking about, 8 months from now. So I think those are things that everybody could at least consider there. That's all I have.
Thank you for the presentation. I think that we're all pleased to have been involved in the budget process for a number of months. As Vice Mayor Dent mentioned, we all had an opportunity to talk with you and the city manager. We had our budget retreat in February. We've had multiple public hearings, so the public has had a chance to read about the budget, participate in the process. And I just wanted to piggyback on a couple of things that Mr. Maslin said about assessments. We have to remember, too, that this is all market-driven, and it's, to me, an indication of how desirable Williamsburg is as a place to live. And so people want to live here, and they appreciate what we offer and the services that are available to them. Time will tell whether increased interest rates will slow that market down a little bit, but as I say, that'll be time to tell. And I think one thing, too, about the budget that's very important and goes to what the mayor was saying is it continues us to move forward and to work towards those GIOs that all of City Council voted on as our initiatives and things that were important and to fulfill the vision that we created for the city of Williamsburg. So thank you.
Rogers?
Yeah, I echo every sentiment that's been said on the historic nature of this budget. I might add in a point of that I admire how much Williamsburg, and I hope other cities will emulate this, is transparent in our budget process. To Councilman Ramsey's points, we certainly have many in-person opportunities for the public to get involved, but we've also gone to the trouble of sending out thousands of letters to homeowners, giving them an update on what their real estate tax is, and then even having a updated and accessible online tool for people to go in and do some of the hard work of budgeting themselves. So I think that's something that is very unique in Williamsburg, is how much of a purview you can get into the budget process. But given the nature of the larger size of it, it really is a fantastic opportunity we have here to invest in some of the projects that we've had on our GIO list, or that we have the fortune of investing in given the American Rescue Plan Act funding, but at the same time, in that same budget, also provide for a general salary increase for those that work for the city and some tax relief in real estate and personal property taxes. I'm excited to support this budget. And as a last note, I will just give a huge thank you to Director Dameron, to our finance team, to City Manager Trivett, and everyone who's worked on this budget. It was mentioned in either a meeting I had recently or the last council meeting that often if you drive by the municipal building late at night, Director Dameron's lights are still on. In that budget season is a heavy lift. So we very much thank your time, your team's time, and appreciate all the work that you put into this. Thank you.
I thought he was going to recommend turning it off to save electricity, but he means you're there. Yes, so certainly do appreciate all the work that you have done and all the staff do every day. So appreciate that. There's no other comments. Is there a motion?
So I move that City Council approve Resolution 22-12, adopting the budgets and local tax levies for fiscal year 2023.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay. So it takes us to new business. Item A is resolution number 22-08, a recommendation of the City Council of the City of Williamsburg for appointments to board and commission.
So the Board of Equalization is
Board of Equalization.
appointed by the Circuit Court with a recommendation from City Council, and we've done this by resolution for several years now. It makes it a lot simpler to file the appropriate pleadings. So the resolution requests reappointment for Charles Young to the board for a 3-year term.
Motion?
So I move that City Council adopt Resolution 22-08, recommending the reappointment of Charles Young to the City of Williamsburg's Board of Equalization for a term beginning on July 1, 2022, and ending on June 30th, 2025.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Takes us to item B, consideration of and approval of a joint resolution number 22-13 to amend the restated contract for the joint operations of the Williamsburg-James City County School District. Mr. Trivett.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We did receive the draft proposal from James City County, who's taken the lead on the school contract renewal. As you all know, the contract is a 5-year term, and our term is up this coming fiscal year. So we need a new contract to take effect July the 1st. Over the last few months, we've been working with James City County on terms that they wanted to change. The changes are not necessarily significant. There are 3 of them. The first is changing how the year-end funding surplus currently works. So at the end of the year, the school district generally finishes ahead, and that money is returned to the localities. Typically, they come to us with a list of things that need to be funded in the year-end spending plan. So we'd like to change the contract to better handle that process. And the change includes that 10% of that surplus will come back to the localities with no restriction on how it's spent. And the other 90% will go into a fund in each locality that will then go back to the school district in the coming fiscal year. There is a provision that allows them to request funding in the current fiscal year as a year-end spending plan, as they do now, but only in extreme circumstances, as the contract reads. So the idea there is to try and limit those spending requests going forward and help us do a better job of planning ahead for those expenses in the budget before it's approved. The second change is really just a housekeeping issue, and that is to change the flow of funds for the state sales tax portion that is dedicated for education. Right now, that money flows through the locality and then to the district, and so we're changing the contract to allow that funding to go directly to the school district. And then the third change is requiring the school board to have a 5 of 7 majority, a supermajority, for the votes that they take on the budget, the capital improvement plan, and the hiring of a new superintendent. And those are the 3 changes that are reflected in the contract provided by James City County.
And so then everything else is the same?
Yes.
The per pupil ratio?
Right.
Okay.
We've been operating in a joint school district in some form or another since 1950s. And as part of another exercise of considering the school contract, I did a comparison of what we pay per pupil to the state average. And I said in the agenda item summary that it's financially beneficial for us. And if you just look at that number, it's a very telling fact. I think our cost per pupil is around $9,500, and the statewide average is over $12,000. So I think we're doing quite well, given the fact that we have a stellar school system. So this is a beneficial contract for all of us, and this will take us out for another 5 years.
Well, I would certainly agree. I hope our partners feel the same. Being in a joint system provides a lot for the children of our community. Great education, great extracurricular activities, sports, you name it. I know that there's phenomenal teachers and staff that make up the school system. So I'm pleased to be able to stay with the contract and look forward to funding it. The 3 changes that you've mentioned, I think, makes better sense to handle the excess funds. Those funds ultimately went back to the school in a subsequent year, so this allows it to stay there with some planning, and I think that's good. The funding direct from the state makes sense. I mean, all we did is write another check and send it, so it kind of, it's not a number that we can affect once we get it. It by law has to go to the school, so why not send it directly there? The supermajority on those items, if that's something that they feel strongly that they should have, then I don't think that's an issue. I think those items that the supermajority required probably are unanimous votes anyways. You know, certainly hiring of a superintendent. So if that's important to the county, then I can support that. Mr.
Yeah, and thank you, Mayor. As in a conversation I've had with Mr. Trivett recently, you know, occasionally I would say that we're approached by people in the community that feel that we need to consider our own school system, and that comparison about what we pay is evident that we certainly wouldn't have the tax rate that we have if we decided that we were going to have our own school system. And as the mayor mentioned, that would just be provided for a school system. So, you know, I think all of our students are getting quality education for what we invest in the joint school system. And I don't see where any three of these changes has a negative impact on our agreement.
Mr. Maslin?
Yeah, I agree with the previous comments. And last week, the city manager and I had an opportunity to attend the teacher appreciation event for the school district at the William Mary School of Education, which was really great to see teachers recognized from each school, each level, and then, you know, the teacher elected by those to represent the whole school district going forward. So that was great. One thing I'd like to see, if we have the 10% surplus coming back to us, that we direct that to our CIP line item for school facilities. Thank you.
I have no other comments to add to what's already been made.
Mr. Rogers?
And neither do I. Thank you, City Manager Trivett, for your work in renegotiating this contract.
So I move that City Council adopt the revised operational contract for the Williamsburg James City County School Division by Resolution 22-13 as proposed.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay, so near the end of our agenda is an open forum. Again, if anybody would like to come forward and address council on any matters on their mind, please come forward. Keep waiting for Mr. Braxton to come forward. Well, seeing none, I'll close the open forum, and next item is adjournment. Is there a motion?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
We're adjourned.